Now in studio, international affairs analyst, Mr. Dan Perry. Thank you very much, Mr. Perry, for joining us. So as we speak, the masses are gathering in Tel Aviv and elsewhere in the country, yet again, calling for any deal, essentially. They're not even saying a deal now, a deal that will bring back any deal, just say yes. And yet, there are no signs that any deal is indeed materializing.
Well, think about the government's original two goals that they claimed were complementary and not contradictory: to destroy Hamas fully, meaning to remove them from power in Gaza, at the very least, and to return the hostages. And there was an implication that military pressure on Hamas would hasten the return of the hostages, because Hamas is normal people that don't want the people to suffer, normal leaders that don't want their people to suffer, and are somehow accountable. That was obviously a dubious assertion. Hamas only benefits from the suffering of their people. That is not real leverage that Israel could deploy. And therefore, we find ourselves 6 months down the line with neither goal having been achieved, and Israel having suffered reputational damage that is at a level where there's something approaching an academic boycott against its academicians, and all kinds of talk of arms embargoes and investigations for genocide, and still the goals haven't been achieved. So increasingly in Israel, there is a school of thought that says that the two goals have to be decoupled. And the one that is more urgent is the returning of the hostages, because the hostages will die. And there are obviously reports and more than suspicions that a large proportion of the ones that are still there are in fact no longer alive. Now look,
I would just like to know that we're seeing live images from Tel Aviv now on the screen, the weekly gathering, one of many protests currently taking place, but this is the main one.
And remember, there's fears of an Iranian attack, so people who are out in large gatherings in public right now are in fact rather brave, and their motivation is very high. The point, Ellie, is this. There is a school of thought, and it's not extreme leftists, and it's not defeatists. It's people who understand the two goals are not necessarily complementary and maybe contradictory, that say maybe the best thing for Israel to do after 6 months, and after having visited such stupendous and some would say exaggerated punishment on the people of Gaza, basically, and having degraded Hamas, maybe it's time to consider accepting Hamas's stated conditions for return of all the hostages, which would mean ending the war and pulling out of Gaza, with Hamas having been badly degraded but left in charge. Now, this is obviously extremely difficult for Israelis to accept. Extremely. On the other hand, it might not necessarily be so foolish to do so if what followed was a zero-tolerance policy for any further misbehavior from Hamas. Well, but it wasn't. It just wasn't.
No, so but from now on, no matter what the deal...
I'm not so sure. But I know this, and I'm rather sure of this. Right now, Israel's ability to go in and finish off Hamas is hampered by the presence of the hostages, because there is a very serious risk that to go in and actually hit Sinwar and his fellow leaders where they are would be sacrificing the hostages.
That this is not a scenario that is likely to happen at this point in time. Anyways, the military campaign is not at its peak and not going to get more intense.
Why have we been stalemated for 2 or 3 months now?
No, but
it's because of this. Now consider this. How much easier would it be to have finished the job more quickly if there were no hostages being held by Sinwar? It would obviously be easier.
Yeah, again, there is no suggestion that there'll be a more intense military campaign should the hostages get out.
No, but I'm saying there should be. In other words, if Israel accepts Hamas's conditions, and in a way that would be a surrender. And to be clear, I'm not advocating it. I'm saying from knowledge that this is a scenario that's being considered by extremely serious people. To take Hamas at its word, leave it to whatever degree it still exists in charge in Gaza, and then prepare for the inevitable final battle when Hamas fires the first rocket. But at least then you're presenting to the world a narrative that is sustainable.
Of defeat, of outright defeat and surrender.
A narrative where you know what you want. And what you want is to move in on Hamas when hostages are no longer there. And you've prioritized saving the hostages. Now consider this. Not doing that can quite credibly be presented as having sacrificed the
All
hostages.
right, we need to move on. Dan Perry, thank you very much for this.